Adam, thank you for taking the time to visit earlier this week. Congratulations on your nomination, and congratulations to your wonderful family as well. I want to talk a little bit about snapback sanctions and their effectiveness. The president has said that sanctions were not stopping Iran from advancing their nuclear program. He has said that the only alternative to this deal is war, because sanctions would not stop Iran from advancing their nuclear program. Yet he's also said that snapback sanctions will be the punishment if they violate this deal, and that punishment will be effective. Seems to me logically contradictory to say that Iran's economy, which is currently struggling, is not going to be deterred by sanctions from advancing their nuclear program, but at some indeterminate time in the future, should they violate the deal, when their economy is healthier and stronger and their conventional military is stronger as well, that snapback sanctions would be effective at that point. Could you help me explain that seeming logical inconsistency?
Well, I'd be happy to try, and of course, I would not presume to speak for the president or what he was intending with his remarks, but I think the point that he and many others have made is that throughout the period, let's say from 2005 to 2010-11, while we were ratcheting up the sanctions, of course, Iran continued to add to its enrichment program, continued to add to its stockpile, continued to add centrifuges. The sanctions were placing a very heavy thumb on the scale, and ultimately, I think, had a determinative impact in terms of how Iran behaved with the election of Rouhani and with their approach at the negotiating table. But the sanctions alone didn't stop the enrichment. It was, of course, the concessions that they made to allowing the inspectors to export their stockpile by 98%, to bring down their centrifuges and infrastructure. All of those changes at the negotiating table are what are going to move us from the current 2 to 3 month breakout time to more than 12-month breakout time. And so it's those changes that we so desperately needed for all of us who are worried and have been worried about Iran's nuclear program. In terms of snapback, I think it's a very potent force for all the reasons that you've spoken about. Iran has seen firsthand that despite early years where there's a lot of bluster on Iran's part, will become self-sufficient, economy of resistance. Well, the Iranian people are not looking for an economy of resistance. They're not looking for being wholly dependent on Iranian self-made goods. They're desperate for technology, for goods, for services from the West and from the rest of the world. And so the threat that they could come out from under these sanctions but fall back under them if they didn't abide by the deal is, I think, a very real one. And that's a political one for Iran's leadership as well.
But if the supreme leader and if President Rouhani started the negotiations in part because of the economic pain the sanctions has brought, some point in the future, maybe 6 months from now, maybe 6 years from now, if they're caught cheating, let's say they have a covert enrichment facility, their economy will be stronger. They will have demonstrated the political desire to cheat on this deal, and then we're going to reimpose the sanctions that weren't enough to stop them at this point. Do you understand the logical inconsistency that I'm worried about here?
I'm not sure. In other words, I think everyone acknowledges that the sanctions were a key, if not the key, pressure point that brought them to the table.
But not to stop the advances of their nuclear program.
So I think, and I hesitate here because there's a law professor in attendance, but I think we would all agree that the sanctions
She was my professor. She was a better professor than I was a student. My time is running down here, so I want to move on to another topic, specifically the topic that you and Senator Corker were addressing, the Iran Sanctions Act. He was talking about advancing promptly on the reauthorization of it. I believe it expires at the end of 2016. That's mostly a political or policy question. I have more of an administrative or technical question, since in Congress, as oftentimes in life, things fall up against their deadlines. From your office's standpoint, if that act is not reauthorized until, say, the last 2 months of 2016, would that create any kind of break in the way that you administer its provisions?
No.
Okay, thank you for that. And then finally, I want to discuss what appears to be a tension in the nuclear deal and the Iran Threats Reduction Act. On the one hand, the Iran Threats Reduction Act says that U.S.-owned foreign subsidiaries cannot do business with Iran. On the other hand, the JCPOA suggests that the president will, in fact, license those subsidiaries. Could you explain the legal underpinnings for the commitment that the JCPOA appears to have made to Iran and to those foreign-owned
yes,
or foreign U.S.-controlled and owned subsidiaries?
Yes, and excuse me for the interruption. Should Iran complete all of its nuclear steps, and we're talking about something that's probably still 6 months away, part of the relief they will earn is that foreign subsidiaries, foreign incorporated subsidiaries of U.S. parents will once again be allowed to do business with Iran so long as they meet some very difficult conditions. They can't be exporting any products from the U.S. They can't be re-exporting U.S.-controlled goods. They can't be obtaining any services from their U.S. parent. It truly has to be a standalone operation. In terms of the Iran Threat Reduction Act, that provision contains the licensing authority that Treasury would anticipate using in that eventuality to allow for certain categories of activity for those foreign subsidiaries.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator